Sure. So again, welcome to our next installment of the Rebels of the Heart virtual conference series, which has been an ongoing segment where we featured great leaders across all different areas of business, different companies, really showing the next generation of leadership and what leadership with a heart looks like in terms of rebels, breaking the rules, creating new rules, and establishing what a healthy business and personal relationship can look like. So with that, I will introduce you to our esteemed panelists. I'll start with you, Susan. If you would please give a little background for the audience about you, your role and your experience, and then work our way around to the group here.
Sure, Derek, thank you. I'm Susan Schmitt, Winchester. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm the Chief HR Officer for a company called Applied Materials. Applied is a Fortune 200 company, a tech company out in Silicon Valley, and I've been with them for about 2 years. Prior to that, I was the Chief HR Officer at Rockwell Automation in Milwaukee, another engineering technology company. And pretty much HR is my middle name. I've been in HR for a long time. I love the field, practitioner, and coming up on finishing 32 years working with amazing companies, global companies all over the world. And I'm also very excited that I am the co-author with Martha Finney of an upcoming book that's called Healing at Work, The Adult Survivor's Guide to Using Career Conflicts to Overcome Your Past and Build the Future You Deserve, which will be out at the beginning of 2021. So Derek, it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining us, Susan. Looking forward to learning more about the book and reading it. So thanks for joining us as well. Tom, we'll come over to you and allow you to introduce yourself and your background as well to the audience. Thanks for joining us today.
Sure. Thanks, Derek. Appreciate it. My name is Tom McCauley. I'm the Vice President of Organizational Effectiveness at Athletico Physical Therapy. Athletico provides outpatient physical therapy, occupational therapy, et cetera, athletic training across 520 clinics across 12 states, mostly through the middle of the U.S. For myself, I've spent about the last 16 years or so in HR. I actually started with a different pedigree. I started as a process consultant and then spent 9 years in corporate finance. Most of that time was with Accenture. So I spent 23 years at Accenture before moving on to other healthcare companies. And so I've spent about the last 16 years or so in varying HR executive roles. So I've really enjoyed this weird combination of metrics and numbers and people and passion. So I found it kind of a sweet spot that way.
Awesome. Thank you. And then we'll come up to you there, Scott. I'll introduce yourself as well. And thanks for being here with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Structural. We are really in the business of helping companies connect their people internally to opportunity. And if you sort of think about how well the world does this when you're looking for a job, when you're trying to professionally network, socially network, we have tools like LinkedIn and Facebook to go out and find people, make connections, find opportunity. We try to kind of flip the narrative and make sure that people can find incredible opportunities embedded in their daily work, from small gigs and projects to opportunities to serve, to be involved with the community, or obviously to take on a whole new role if there's an opportunity that fits them. So I got into this by being an entrepreneur. I launched a company when I was pretty young, about 24, coming out of McKinsey Consulting, launched a firm that went from 0 to 250 people. And I won't bore you with that whole story, but I'll say that when we started, I sort of thought ideas were everything. And by the end, I was very driven about creating incredible experiences for our people and really unleashing their full potential, and how strategic that was to our company. And so we organized Structural around making the future of work better by doing some of those things and bringing technology to bear on that opportunity.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Scott. And again, for everyone, I'm Derek Lundsten, President and CEO of LifeGuides, and we're a peer-to-peer network to help people live their happiest, healthiest, most productive lives, both at home and at work, by connecting people who have been through a life challenge and are now on the other side with those who are going through the experience to get help and to work through that process more healthily, more effectively, more productively. So with that, I want to say it's obvious just from the quick introductions that we all share a passion for people and helping them to be the best version of themselves and to empower them to be great in whatever environment they are. So why don't we start with kind of a softball question. Obviously, we've been through 6 months of massive changes in terms of how we are working, in the environment. Tom, you said this is your first day back in the office, so congratulations on that. Some of us are working in our home offices still. But as you think through the now coming 6 months, how have you individually and your company started to change how you're planning for what this is going to look like over the next 6 to 12 months? Because I think we can look backwards, but I really want to start looking forward. And how is this now changing the way that you're looking at planning differently than you have in previous years? So any one of you can take that question.
Yeah, I can go ahead and jump in, Derek, and talk a little bit about that. So as we plan for the future, one of the key things that we're looking at as a company is how do we really leverage this opportunity and come away from the last 6 months and the last several months beyond that for our colleagues overseas, even stronger and more positioned in the marketplace, the talent marketplace, to differentiate ourselves against our competitors. And so, like many companies, we've essentially told our employees who are working remotely that we don't expect them to be coming back to campus until at least 2021. We have a 4-phased approach that we use within each country to determine where we are and where we should be. The first phase is really all about critical infrastructure, critical operations, because we're an essential business in the semiconductor industry. We then have what's called the on-site operations, which is where we bring additional people back in a very safe way. And then beyond that, it's return to campus, and then eventually what we're calling the new normal. And each country where we operate are at different places on that journey. And in some cases, countries move forward, but because of what's going on from a health standpoint, we've had to go back. That just happened we've got a lot of employees that are in Israel. So the Israel team was starting to bring people back. But of course, we're tracking whatever's going on in the country related to the pandemic and to the impact. And so those are the phases. But ultimately, I think what we're learning is that we're never going to be the same. And of our global population, we've got about 23,000 employees operating in many countries. About half of those employees are remote and are able to be fully effective remotely. The other 50% are either at customer sites or in manufacturing or operating in our labs. And so for those people, 50% of the workforce that are working very productively at home, we anticipate that we will have much more dynamic where we'll have people working remotely. We've surveyed our people. Some people love working remotely, others don't. And so we're planning some interim steps to figure out ways to potentially bring teams back together for collaboration purposes. Although our CEO's got a very strong vision of innovate anywhere, collaborate everywhere. And so I think the opportunity that we have as an HR team is how do we really think creatively about talent anywhere, rethinking the entire future of travel, the future of customer support, experts anywhere. Do experts have to be in a specific country, or can we draw on expertise around the world? And I actually think it's quite an exciting time for HR professionals as we're rethinking how we go to work. The social experiment, the global social experiment of everybody basically going home, except for the essential workers that, we had many essential workers that we needed to keep our business running to be able to meet our customer needs. But I think we will be a very different company in the future. And so that's how we're starting to envision what does that future look like and how do we really capitalize on it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's very helpful. We'll come back to and dig into some of the specifics around that in just a moment. One of the words you mentioned a few times that I want to highlight, because Scott mentioned in his introduction, is the word opportunity. And I'm going to come back to you at the end here, Tom, in just a second. But Scott, kind of share with you how you are looking at that same question, and also look at around the world, the lens of opportunity and what you're doing in that process.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing we've learned, our company was only launched in 2017, so it's still relatively young. Actually, I went full-time in late 2017, so it's just been a few years since we got rolling. And what I think, one of the premises that we were launched under was that you can't rely on sort of institutional networks and walking around to find experts and connections anymore. There's so many problems with that, and one of the problems is that you shouldn't have to play golf to make the right connections at your company. I'll use this. My favorite example is there's an old Friends episode where Jennifer Aniston starts smoking so that she can spend more time with her boss who also smokes. And we've all seen those kind of fortuitous things happen, and we tell legends in our companies about how great that is, that those ad hoc connections are made and something amazing happened out of it, but it really doesn't scale very well. And so this shock has kind of taken all of those tools, for better or worse, all those walking around the hallway tools, geographically limited tools, off the table. And I think initially we were all happy to, be at home and try that out. It was kind of exciting and the adrenaline was up. And we saw a lot of superficial activity, both in our platform and frankly in our 20-person company too, because we're smaller, but our company, our clients tend to be much larger. And it would be the virtual happy hour, virtual trivia, whatever. Well, man, the boom is off that rose. Like nobody wants to be on Zoom for an extra hour with their team at the end of the day right now. And so we saw a transition happen that I think is indicative of where things are heading, which is in our platform, people were originally searching and connecting in kind of soft ways, meeting people, making connections. But we've seen a huge surge as this pandemic has gone on in people really seeking opportunities. They want opportunities to try new things, to help, to learn, to connect, to form a group, to have an affinity group to tackle a certain issue, to innovate, all of that. And I actually think that the future of connection and networking in companies is not going to be superficial at all. It's going to be scalable, and it's going to be organized around some level of action that people can take to support each other in a tangible way, to help each other succeed in a tangible way, to learn, to grow, all of those things. And so for me, when I think forward, I think we really have moved past superficial things as a way of creating connection, support, care, and empathy within the organization to more tangible, scalable things where somebody in Tokyo can support somebody in Minnesota in the environment we'll have 3 years from now. And we won't be reliant anymore at all on the old sort of geographically based networks.
Yeah, completely agree. Thank you for that, Scott. And so Tom, I'm coming to you last intentionally as well, because I would imagine in your business, this has been almost having to evaluate your whole business model, right? Physical therapy is typically done in person, right? Yeah. So you not only had to change how you manage internally, but even externally with customers. So when you look at opportunities, when you look at adaptation or adaptability, when you look at the intentionality of creating those connections and creating opportunities, I'd love to hear how your organization and you personally are tackling some of these questions, because I think your scope, and you're all different sized companies, which is also helpful. From the startup to a Fortune 200 publicly traded, and then you are all, essentially a family owned private business for quite some time, and it's kind of a different lens as well. So I'd love to hear culturally from your perspective.
Yeah, it was, you're inside my head. That's exactly where I was going, is that, the bread and butter of physical therapy is hands-on. And so, I think our biggest thing has just been dealing with the pace of change, and not just at work, like how our delivery models, certainly we're re-exploring, and we're trying to figure out which ones are going to stay and which ones we're going to have to explore and expand. So for example, we used to do telehealth. And so telehealth with my doctor, that makes sense. But telehealth when I'm rehabbing my knee or my hip, that's a whole different thing. So, we see now pictures, it was kind of fun because it was real brainstorming, locking people in a room saying like, figure it out. How are we going to do this? And if people don't get their physical therapy, then, after their surgery, they're going to go right back to square one and maybe have to go back to surgery again. So, we see pictures of our physical therapists on the floor of their clinics, with the Zoom on the floor with them and stretching and showing people how to do stuff. Completely different than how we used to do it, And then, just people, not only our employees, but our patients getting used to having masks on. And when I'm manipulating your leg or your knee or your hip, you can't get around that kind of proximity. But what can we do, to alleviate any fears or trust that way? So, there's other models too, like everybody used to come into our clinics. Well, now our home health, what do we want to do with that? Maybe we come to you, or maybe there's a different way that we can deliver these services that we're not even thinking about today. So all of that stuff is really up in the air. And I think you're just seeing us pivot now from maybe being reactive and on defense. And literally right now, I feel like you're starting to feel the pendulum swing to us going on offensive. Like, okay, what do we want to invest in now? What do we want to pour gas on? And what do we see as something like, okay, this was a temporary Band-Aid. That's probably going to fade to black. But let's really go after this part of the delivery model. But I really think at the end of it, I think the thing that we learned the most was just the rapid pace of change. I mean, we had a great story, and we're about 6,000 employees now, of 29 straight years of growth and everything was, going great. Then all of a sudden, nobody's doing outpatient surgery. Nobody's like the main, flow of work coming out of hospitals or whatever was shut down, like zero. So that was jarring in itself. And then once we started getting our hands around the business model, then the human side of it, like, what do I do with my kids at home? How can I be a physical therapist, on Zoom with my kids crawling all over me? There was a lot of different things of the workday itself. The clinic used to be open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Well, we got to hold that loosely now too. So I don't, coming from, I know that Scott came from McKinsey. I came from Accenture. I'm used to change. It's part of my DNA. We used to make a joke that if we didn't reorganize the whole company about every 18 months, something was wrong. Right. But here, they've had a successful business model for 29 years. And now we're starting to see that shake loose a little bit and be like, well, what do we look like in 2 or 3 years? And that's fun. It's a fun place. It's scary and fun at the same time.
It is. So something you all brought up, and I want to hear more about each of your perspective, is just now that you've changed the hours, so to speak, of when people work and where they work, and changing the expectation that people can work and innovate anywhere within their constraints or non-constraints of their life. How have you seen the interactions between your teams? What are some of the surprises that have been good? What are some of the challenges that you were not necessarily expecting, and how have you answered or responded to those, or how are you now responding to them in the moment?
I've been really blown away by the opportunity to create even closer connections with our people. So for example, when we were trying to navigate the pandemic early on and figuring out creative ways to encourage people to come back to work because we needed the essential workers to keep our business running, the entire HR community just pulled together. We were doing daily calls with the whole global HR group. 30 minutes, what are the hot issues? What are the topics? What are the questions? How do we support you? And then that quickly grew to, how do we support our people managers? And recognizing that the people managers are essentially on the front lines of managing all the issues, right? The customer issues, the technology issues, the employee issues. And so we created these forums with our people managers. We started in the US. We ended up doing it in Asia as well. We've got our largest populations in the US and Asia. And we would just create these moments where we would invite every people manager in the region to call in. And I had our director of communications was our host, and he could be a TV host. He's so good. And then we had a whole panel of experts. So many members of my leadership team, our environmental health and safety team, our employment attorney, and managers could ask. We always did a short presentation, the key things they needed to know, what policy changes were we making. And then we open it up, and we had 1,000 people managers calling in, and we started to create this relationship with people that was a very personal relationship that, at least in my tenure in the company, it was like an accelerated opportunity to connect with and support people in the organization. And so that's been a big piece, is that community connectivity and communication avenue, so to speak. And then the other thing that's been so interesting is it's all the creative ways that teams are figuring out how to bring people together. So for example, this morning, every quarter we do our global HR team recognition, who's done the most amazing work. The team got together and put together this entire Academy Awards video. I mean, I had to get dressed up in a ballroom dress to do the top award.
Oh, awesome.
Our HR business partner for HR was in a tux. Of course, it was just the jacket. He had shorts on to go with the tux. And we did this global recognition, and it was so just energizing and fun and creative. And so this ability to create a different relationship where everyone's on the same playing field. There's no corporate headquarters right now. In the past, the corporate headquarters was sort of the gravity of the whole company. Right. But now corporate headquarters, we're all at home.
We have a little square box on the screen, all of them.
All equal on the webcast or Zoom or Teams or whatever forum you're using. And so it's really created this, I think, unique opportunity for not only continuing culture, but actually creating an even more captivating culture. Mm-hmm. And so I've really enjoyed that. And I've heard from some of my peers. One of my peers who I just have so much respect for is Tracy Kehoe. She's the CHRO at HP. Mm-hmm. She was talking the other day about they created a global a dance event where everybody from all over the world got into their, their little boxes and had a big dance, dance-a-thon. They had 12 hours. She hired a DJ. And, finding ways to encourage people to connect and to take care of themselves. And that's probably the second thing, and then I'll stop talking, is the recognition that we know that productivity has gone up. We've benchmarked, we've surveyed people, we know how they're feeling, both the leaders as well as employees. So that's good, right? So remotely people are even more productive. The challenge, and this is probably not really that insightful, is managing work-life balance, burnout, and stress.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the big opportunities as we go forward, and Derek, you and I talked about this as well, is how do companies figure out ways to take even more of a leadership role relative to the health and wellness of people as they're managing no boundaries between work and life.
Yeah.
And I think that'll be another big area of opportunity.
Completely agree. We'll dig in more into that in just a few moments. Thank you, Susan. Gentlemen, either one of you have a follow-on response to anything Susan shared with that question?
For us, it was a little bit different because we have two distinct audiences. We have those that are hands-on in the clinics, and they have their own, barriers and things they got to get through. But then for the rest of us, it was mobilizing remotely, like our billing center and cash applications and accounts payable. We were probably 30% down the road of being technically enabled. Then all of a sudden this stuff hit, and it's like, whoa, we're not. And so the pace that moved at to understand how technology, it's either going to be one or the other. It's either going to be an enabler of your business or it's going to be a barrier. And all of a sudden now the priority is crystal clear where we need to move next, which is, especially with a mobile workforce, like, how can we better communicate, not just doing your job, but now using, if we're building the pipes out into the field correctly and efficiently, how can we use that for communication and two-way communication and engagement and, connection and that type of thing. And before it was just like, yeah, we need to go that way. And now it's like, whoa, like we have to, it is pedal to the metal. That is our clear top priority to ensure that for the next generation of Athletico, that we are a technically enabled, provider of medical services.
Yeah, it's required decisiveness, that's for sure. And everyone, right?
Yeah, well said.
I think we need it's survival in many instances, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And Scott, I know you understand that firsthand as an entrepreneur. We both share that, so love your thoughts on any of that too.
Oh well, I can't even remember because Susan and Tom said so many things that got my mind going. What the original question was, but I want to piggyback on what Tom just said. There has been a really, really exciting leveling up on technology. So you take a company like the 250 person company I ran before, we used Slack. We had about 25% adoption. People using it really, really well. I used to call them Slacktivists, that really got on there and, they were working it, and they're good internal networkers. And we try to get them to help others, and that was great. And then it kind of would fade off, and maybe the finance team's less engaged, or there's some generational gaps. There's been a really great leveling up on technology, but the thing that I think has been most interesting, particularly about the initial shock, is how it opened the door for a lot of people who hadn't given them permission to be empathetic, haven't given themselves permission to be empathetic managers, and particularly hadn't built the skill of doing it virtually, to really be forced into doing it. So they're sitting on the call, they're on Teams for the third time with someone, or they're talking to this remote person, and they're having to ask, how's it going? And ask really basic questions, not strategic. Are you safe? Can you do your job? What's going on with your kids? Because they need to know that to have empathy. And I found, just as an individual, and I feel like I am okay at this stuff to begin with, just by asking the questions, I found out the profound differences between the people with school-age children versus people who were really concerned with their parents, versus we have young employees who are single. That's a horrible position to be in right now. We have young employees who, are thinking of starting a family, and they're in kind of that stressful period. We had one who had a baby during COVID, and being empathetic to them doesn't mean helping them accomplish what I need to accomplish. It means kind of meeting them where they're at on tools, on schedule, on support. Sometimes it's a day off. Sometimes it's just, hey, if you need to not work 3 hours during the day, we're going to understand for a while you get your feet underneath you. And I think that opportunity to not just level up on the tech and put everybody in an even playing field, but also to kind of help managers and challenge leaders to use the tech in a way that's a little more humanized has been fun to watch. And it's been fun as a leader because I feel more connected to my team than I ever did before. I know them better, oddly, than I did when we worked in the office together.
So first off, thank you for articulating why LifeGuides exist, Scott. That was just a nice tee up. So I'll say that.
You wrote it for me. I'm just repeating what you said.
Exactly. And I agree with you about exactly what you said, that it has required a different level of humanism in our leadership, right? And I think that every time we talk with folks on these panels, it's really fun to hear, even firsthand, where people will open up on the things that they're going through in both their work and their personal lives and share that. And I think that there's a greater level of openness, and leaders are just genuinely being more vulnerable with going on, because it allows people to connect, understand each other. And it goes back to what you said, Susan, on that parity that we all understand. It's levelized or normalized that human connection in a way that I think is really building trust, or has an opportunity, to use your words, to build trust in a really significant way as we continue to evolve through this process. And that kind of goes into my next question, which is kind of a good tee up for all of you. And then Susan, it kind of goes along with the line of your book on healing. So healing on a psycho-emotional level. And then even for you, Tom, you were literally, your business is in the process of helping people heal physically. And Scott, you kind of just tapped into this bigger trend. I'd love to hear a bit more about that process for how you're seeing healing as something that's emerging from this experience, both on a macro level within your corporations, your companies, but also within your teams, and how you are personally nurturing that for those people or for yourselves. I'd love to hear that. And I'm happy to answer that question too. So any one of you can take it. Susan, you're an expert on this, so maybe you want to kick it off.
I don't know if I'm an expert, and in the spirit of full disclosure, my book I started writing it long before the pandemic. So I wouldn't say it's specifically related to coming through what we've been through, although it definitely is connected. So basically the essence of the book is that most of us think of the workplace as a place of stress, anxiety, and worry. That happens a lot in people's careers as they're going through different things that are working or not working. And essentially what I'm doing in the book with co-author Martha Finney is teaching people that actually the workplace is a wonderful opportunity to use conflict as a laboratory for healing. And, so in a nutshell, we all come out of different backgrounds and different childhoods. And I'm not a therapist, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time thinking about the childhood, but what many of us have endured as we were younger ranges from a continuum of extremely negative childhood experiences to other experiences. The extreme would be some kind of abuse. It's called adverse childhood experiences. There are 10 of them: mental, physical, sexual abuse, violence in the home, incarcerated parent. There's a variety of different ACEs is what they're called, all the way to growing up in a family where perhaps one parent or both were overly demanding, controlling, critical. Whether they intended it or not, we typically walk away from our childhoods with some beliefs about ourselves, some potentially positive beliefs, and then also some potentially limiting beliefs. And what I discovered on my own journey was that I spent many years of my career on what I call the unconscious wounded path. In other words, my success and achievement was really fueled more from an underlying belief that I wasn't good enough. And again, there's no judgment towards my parents. It's just what I took away from my childhood believing. And so the achievements were fueled by a need to prove myself, that constantly feeling like no matter what I was doing was never quite enough. And I would say that formula worked really well for many years in terms of the overachiever, perfectionist, people pleaser. But there reached a point in my career where the work became more complex, the opportunities and challenges were bigger, the impact of decisions was greater, and the old formula really stopped working as well. And what was occurring for me personally was just a sense of not really, I'd come home from a day of work and I would rethink everything. Should I have done something differently? Should I have said something differently? Uh-oh, I said that, I shouldn't have said this. And this constant process of overthinking what I had done or not done.
Yeah.
And it took a huge toll. And frankly, it got to the point where I was not really having a whole lot of fun. My work-life balance was completely off kilter because I was always focused on doing more in the workplace. And what happens to many of us is we all experience some kind of workplace conflict, whether it's being passed for a promotion, boss is angry at you, maybe there's a bully that's taking you on. There's all kinds of typical workplace conflicts. They tend to cause us to spiral down, especially if it's fueled by a negative self-limiting belief, into that kind of zone of stress, anxiety, and worry. What we teach in the book is actually, with some very simple steps, we can step off that unconscious career path where we're responding based on old behaviors, old beliefs, onto the healing career path, the conscious healing career path, and respond very differently in those moments of conflict. Martha and I call them bumper car moments. And sometimes, like the bumper car rides at the fair, you're kind of skimming along and thinking everything's great, and then someone slams into you. Right. And you're surprised because you thought they were a friend or a family member, and you walk away kind of shaking your head. That happens to us at work. But what we get the opportunity to do is actually use those moments of conflict, and rather than responding the old way that we might have in the past, for me it was people pleasing, overachieving, having no work-life balance, to actually unwind those moments and respond from a totally different place. And along that journey, we get the opportunity to discover greater levels of self-acceptance, which therein allows us to have more joyful careers, as well as more joy in life generally. And that's the nature of the book. We teach people how to do that.
Well, I can't wait to read it. Thank you for sharing that. There's so much to explore in that commentary. So thank you. And thank you for being so open and sharing your personal experience and your own journey with us as well. One thing you said, I mean, I'll come back to you gentlemen, just a moment on this to respond, but I wanted to say that conflict and or resistance, to another word, I mean, I know that's a big part of resistance in physical therapy, physical healing, right? So there's an interesting correlation there behind what you were saying. So Tom, I'd love to hear your thoughts on just the same question around, fostering an environment of healing within the environment we now live in, and how as a leader, you're taking responsibility for that in your organization or even personally, whatever it feels appropriate.
Yeah, no, I think the healing is ongoing. I think we're still in it right now to a great degree. And, I think Susan mentioned earlier the wellness part of it. What keeps me up at night is I don't know if we know the depth of people's how disturbed they are right now. And it made us question about how we're listening, how we're communicating. And when I say communicate, you always naturally think outward, but I don't think we might've been listening all that well. And so, how are we listening? What are we going to do with that? How can we adapt? And so, some of the things we thought about were, what's going on around our kitchen tables at home after people leave? That's what's really top of mind. And so whether it be BLM or COVID-19, or that's what they're not talking about our total rewards offerings or like our reimbursement. Like it's not what they're talking about. How can we help them? So we changed some of our communications to say, yes, there's some business related ones, but there's also like, hey, your kids are going back to school in a few weeks. Here's some things to think about as it relates to change and how kids adapt and absorb change and how they're watching you. What does that directly have to do with our P&L? Nothing at all. But I think it was new to our culture to just say like, hey, here's you as a parent, like one of the hats that you wear. Hopefully this is helpful. Inclusion diversity didn't formally exist at our company. It was on our long-term strategic plan to kick it off in Q1 of next year. But guess what? How do we communicate on those type of topics? So we're like, screw it. We're starting it right now. And so we just had our first, Inclusion Diversity Council meeting this past Monday. So how can that group help us adapt and listen and talk and get those things on the table so we can genuinely talk about it, and not just some kind of like training that you check the box and say like, yes, I feel like I'm more aware, but something really that we can do in our clinics and in our groups to say, hey, here's a real life example. Listen to it for a couple of minutes, hit pause, and now you guys talk about it. Like be real people and talk about it. And then you could take those if you want to and pull them back to your kitchen dinner table and say like, kids, what do you think about this? And that's where real life is being lived right now. And again, I love your point about healing. That's such a powerful word to me, that that I think we're definitely in it right now. And it might be another couple of years worth of healing, until we can, maybe turn a little bit. But what a unique inflection point that we're at, like right now as HR professionals.
Yeah, we are in the moment. This is such a period of introspection. This last 6 months to now and to where we're going is a moment of great introspection as a collective group of people and as organizations, I believe.
Yeah.
So, Scott, I can see that you want to chime in on this topic, so feel free.
There was actually a good question in the chat that I think relates to this question from Tom about what does it mean to give yourself permission to be an empathetic manager? Because I think that this, the environment that we create inside an organization, empathy is a really important part of it, but I think empathy is also very misunderstood. And so we have, there's actually a great book on this I just read that structured some of my thoughts called The Empathy Edge, by the way. Wonderful, wonderful book. And, one of the points in the book that makes you want to be empathetic is very selfish around, people are more productive. There's a whole section on turnover. 90% of employees are more likely to stay with an organization they perceive to be empathetic. Your 60% of employees say they're willing to take a pay cut to work with an organization that has more empathy. And then the question is like, what does that mean? And I think that's where the skills that you develop on listening openly and sharing openly and creating a sort of space where people feel like they can be understood. They can also understand where you're coming from. You're vulnerable enough as a leader. It's a tool they use in the military even, is vulnerability of the leader, acknowledging their own mistakes and limitations, helps others come forward and do it. And I'll just share, there's a couple examples, that I have, because I think we misconstrue empathy. A simple one is, I work with a lot of technical people. Susan might have this experience. I've done it throughout my career. And many of them are very introverted. Huge part of the population is introverted, but extroverts often organize meetings. And if you're in a workplace as an introvert and you grew up being an introvert, you might have a lot of emotional baggage with being an introvert, not being able to get your opinions heard, whatever. Some people who are introverts complain about their extroverted sibling a lot. And then you come into the workplace and it re-triggers that trauma again and puts you in a space of listening, not being heard, whatever. And what we've done in the past and what I do now is just make sure people have time to see questions and ideas ahead of time and react ahead of the meeting, be prepared for what's going to happen in the meeting, because my salespeople love agendaless meetings in this industry. And that's really unfair to an introverted person. It creates a workplace that's almost a little hostile to them. It's a simple example, but I'll just use one other one because I think it's important that, people take some good tactics out of here. It's tools. So for a lot of people, just not having the right tools to do their work is the most frustrating thing. It makes them feel unprofessional. They waste time. They miss their kid's soccer game because they had to spend extra time doing something. Whether it's a knowledge worker or a factory worker, I think listening well enough to understand, have I provided you the support you need to do your job, the tools and the connections? That tool could be something softer like peer support, it could be, but it can also be a simple, a better computer or a monitor that doesn't suck or whatever. And it's just fascinating how, and you think of you have employees doing Zoom physical therapy, Tom, do they have the right internet access? Do they have the right computer for that? If I have a mask, did the company buy me a great mask, or am I expected to show up with one? How's that working? I think these things actually really matter. And you can you have to make the small actions that go on day to day in the work, I think, reflect your big vision for how empathetic you want to be as a leader. And I think that takes the pressure off that person who says, I'm not really that empathetic, I'm more serious. If they can just, if upgrading the monitor is empathetic, it's a nice entry point for some people who maybe don't want to give hugs.
Well, I'll just build some additional interesting research on your point about experts and introverts. There's research that says if you have 8 people in a meeting, 3 will dominate the conversation. And there's a technique that I learned about. I wish I could remember the name of the woman that I learned it from. It's called private collection. And so during a meeting, the manager, and I think this is another expression of empathetic management, can pose a question to the whole group and then ask everybody to submit their thoughts. And of course, with chats and everything, it's easy to do that. It's called private collection, where everybody's voice gets heard. And I also think it's a really positive, inclusive leadership practice, going back to the points that Tom was making around this amazing opportunity in our country around diversity and inclusion. Being inclusive leaders is also, you know, in terms of virtual as well as across race, across gender, that concept of private collection where everybody's voice gets heard, I think is a really powerful technique. And so I would encourage that as another tool to take away from the call.
Thank you for that, Susan. I was going to say, I was actually part of my question as well, being that we all have some analytical sides and we talked about the quantitative side. How are you all collecting information, allowing your people's voices to be heard and looking at the data now? And are you doing that? I would imagine you are, but tell us more about some of that process, especially as you look at, you know, complete 180 business plans or business models, when you look at building a software company, when you look at global workforces and the nuances in those different markets. How are you assimilating all that information? That's a question for any one of you.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that we're not doing anything that amazing, but we did a pulse survey of our global workforce. We had the survey open for 1 week. We had an 88% response rate in 1 week. And people were writing to me saying, where's the link? Where's the link? I want to give my input. And it was a pulse. You know, how are you doing? What additional support do you need? Do you feel like you're more productive? I see that's one of the questions in the chat is, how do we measure productivity? We asked individuals, do you feel more productive? And then we also asked managers, do you feel like your teams are more productive or the same or less than before COVID? We just asked a series of questions, and we had, I think, 16,000 write-in answers. And so the team developed an AI capability to go through and synthesize the results. And overwhelming, like 94% people felt very confident in the company's ability to navigate through the pandemic based on what they'd seen. Again, we got the feedback about 50% of our people are remote, 50% are on site somewhere. Just amazing feedback about productivity is up, stress and burnout is up, confidence in management. Here are additional things that we need more support with. Kids, you know, managing kids at home. We've created all kinds of resources. We had teachers, spouses who are partners and spouses who are teachers who volunteered their time to be coaches to employees, creating different age groups for employees to join support groups and facilitating those support groups of parents trying to learn from one another. And our pulse survey, we're planning more pulse surveys going forward because we got so much data-rich information about how we can continue to support people, as you know, to the point, I think, Tom, you made the point of how long this could go on for a very long time.
Thank you for that, Susan. Guys, any thoughts on that as well? I'm just chiming on there's a question on the productivity question, which I'll dig into in just a moment, but do you guys have thoughts on anything we shared there?
No, just to share, like, we're a little bit at the other end of the spectrum where we're, you know, as there's been a new infusion of, you know, corporate flavor into our resource center and in our corporate group. We're still on the entry level of data. And so we just did our first employee engagement survey just before, it finished just before COVID hit. So, you know, the ability to have that real-time survey, we just don't have that yet. And so I think it's actually, you know, there's good that comes out of everything is that we're able to say, like, wow, having that ability to get, you know, a new pulse on just something really short and quick every month to see where people are at. Not to say that we don't appreciate or trust the filter coming through leadership, you know, coming up through the ranks, but just to hear some very direct feedback. Not only will you see the information yourself directly and firsthand, but people feel heard. Yeah. You know, they're just I'm making the assumption that your message at the front lines is rolling all the way up exactly as you shared it. And I don't know if they feel that way. So, you know, it cuts out the middleman and just says, what are you feeling? And I love what Susan was saying about having that AI and can sift through the, you know, the comments and stuff. That's our destination, but we've only got a couple of toes in the water that way. But again, the need of this crisis that's landed in our lap has really exacerbated the issue and has proven the business case without having to write one of look how valuable that is to be able to have a direct line of that string from our frontline employees right to the top.
it's really exposed all the weaknesses has been exposed. Also exposed the strengths, right? On both sides. That's the benefit of this as well, is it really is introspection has really made us all look at what we can do differently and also double down on, frankly, in the areas we're doing well. So, Scott, I'll come back up to you again here.
Sure. Our system is built around kind of creating a unique sort of profile on everybody in the organization. I think a lot of times we've seen a lot of the power of that when you move out of resume information, kind of where you went to school, what your skills are, what your background is, that sort of thing, and into things that are more useful in day-to-day work. So simple things like, how much capacity do you have, or are you looking for new opportunities, are great. I think that in this environment, we've seen those questions morph a little. Do you prefer to have the camera on or off? When you're working, some of us really need a break from the camera. I'm definitely in that group. There's also, how do you like to be recognized? You can ask other types of questions like, are you seeking more connections at work outside of your team, or are you currently good? Are you looking for mentors? Are you willing to mentor? Are you open to virtual coffee chats? Can I invite you to that? Actually putting that in somebody's profile, marrying it with maybe the HR data, some of the business data, has been really powerful. And then I would say that the 301 level of that are the clients that are incorporating it with some kind of widely used personality test as well. To get some, reasonably quantitative assessment of who they really are kind of embedded in. So now as a manager, as a collaborator, I have a lot of tools that maybe get me at least to step 5 out of 10 in collaborating with Susan before I've met her for the first time, if she's coming onto my team or I'm meeting her. And that's something that we've seen used much better, frankly, since COVID, because people are investing more time and thought in it.
Yeah, I think that was kind of coming back around. That was kind of where I wanted to go with the next comment or question, which is, if you look back at how we looked at teams before, it was broad segmentation, right? And now we've got this shift towards personalization, which I think we were kind of just talking about. Now we're getting to the point where we can kind of merge those together and have more cohorts, more specific segments with those personal details. Because we all know there needs to be some level of resource allocation that allows us to move efficiently, but while at the same time making sure that people feel seen, people feel heard, and people receive information and feedback in the way that they're going to receive it well, right? And so I think that's really the huge opportunity that I believe we're back to the idea of where we bring the best of human skills with technological and data processing skills. That's where we're moving, right? And I'm impressed by each of you and your perspective of sharing what you're doing in your organizations and what you're doing in your own personal experiences to bring those trends together. So I guess in closing, one of the questions that was here is, what's the one thing, when we talk about diversity, we talk about inclusion, we talk about vulnerability, what's the one priority that you would recommend or that you're focused on right now? Because it goes back to simplification. There's so much. What are you dialing in on for the next 30 days, either personally or with your teams, that you believe is going to really shift as we're thinking through the next chapter of this pandemic and the influence of that?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. When I think about everything that we've talked about, when I think about all the things that we're focused on as a corporation, and in particular, when I think about our roles as leaders in our companies, regardless of what size our companies are, I feel like the leadership opportunity amidst all of this is about creating clarity and minimizing confusion. It's just really providing as much clarity as possible about what we know, as well as clarity about what we don't know and what our plans are to get the answers to it. And I feel like the kind of compass that's guided me as an HR practitioner for all these years is my role is to create clarity and to provide value add solutions to the company that make a difference for both the business as well as the people in it. And as much as we can do to kind of strip away all the noise and really focus in on the things that matter most, that's what I feel like our responsibility is as leaders.
Thank you, Susan.
Yeah, I love that. I love that emphasis of clarity, because that is what a real leader does is zeroes in the focus through the fog, and I think that's where a lot of people are right now. And for those of you listening at home, hopefully you've seen a wide array of different companies. Like ours is just a little bit more underdeveloped than say Susan's company is, and just starting somewhere with some principles, I think, is what's your North Star? I think clarity is a great one. For us, I think it's being adaptable. And, you know, I think our focus over the next maybe 30, 60 days is really on that human side of it, of being genuine and authentic. And even if you know, make a decision quickly, and if you make the wrong one, own it and tell people that, and, you know, try it again. And so I think people read into that, just saying like, hey, they're not out there just, you know, just trying to screw around and, you know, do the corporate speak. They're genuinely interested in me as a whole human being, not just that half at work, but like, oh my gosh, they're asking me about my kids and about my parents and about these other things that really, it's my whole self. And that's really what's behind a lot of the I&D, right? As kicking it off is like, how can you bring your true whole self to work every day in a consistent way? And it includes all of those stressors that are going on outside of 9 to 5. You know, and I think that's where our focus is like, the more that you can cultivate and care for that side of it, the more they're just going to naturally like pour themselves into the company and kick some ass, you know? And I think sometimes it takes an event like this to shake that and be like, let's care for the whole person, you know? And it's not easy to do. It sounds like, you know, fluffy and stuff, but it does take some very pointed, focused effort to say like, how can we care for that aspect of our, you know, our employees?
Well said, Tom. Obviously, I very much agree. That's what we're here to do, literally. So I think we share that purpose. So Scott, I'll come to you there as well on that comment.
You know, I think, well, that question is a very good question. What do you do first? And I think, you know, there's a great Jack Welch quote, which I won't get right. And, you know, he's not as well remembered as he used to be, but it's like, you know, you got to be strategic. You can't just be strategic or tactical. You can't be focused on the bottom line or the people. Often you have to do that. You do as leaders and as managers, and even sometimes as individuals, you don't get to pick one thing necessarily. Every one of our clients, we have clients in retail, we have clients in healthcare, we have clients in public sector. You know, people they're dealing with vastly different situations right now. So I don't think you could give one answer to the question. At the same time, I think that for me, every company's got to handle the basics first. Is it clear where the company's at? Are you being trustworthy, open, and honest in kind of where things are at? And are you really addressing anything that's bottlenecking you from getting to a place where the organization can be successful and individuals can feel aligned in contributing to it? And I think that a lot of these issues we've discussed will be the tactics, you know, underneath that, you know, elevating D&I or elevating how you connect individuals. But it's possible that your problem is you need to spend the next 2 weeks not losing your largest customer and, you know, do that first and then focus on the other things. And that's just the practical state we're in. I mean, let's be real. A lot of companies aren't even going to make it through the next 6 months. So we got to start with and be real that's, for some people listening to the recording later, that might be their reality.
Yeah, well said. I think, I mean, just to summarize what each of you brought in that statement. So clarity, adaptability, trust. Those are 3 underlying or bigger picture weaving elements. But the survivability of just making sure you get through this, make sure the business gets through that, make sure the people get through it, make sure we're taking care of our people or they're taking care of themselves. That's that wellness element that we talked about that we are aligned with. I think those are 4 really, I think we're all nodding our heads. Those are 4 things that we agree on that leaders can be doing right now as, you know, this rebellious, heart-centered leadership that we're advocating is going to move the needle in a positive, productive way, both on individual levels, but also for your teams. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you sincerely to each of you for being rebellious, heart-centered leaders and for showing up and sharing your expertise and wisdom with our audience today and your teams. And I'm, as always, here to support you any way we can. So thank you. It's been a pleasure. And thank you for our audience as well for joining us today and for those who watch the recording after the fact.